You finish Salah. You make your tasbih. You say your salam. And then you notice something you don't want to admit. The prayer is over, but inside you, almost nothing has changed. The same insecurity is there. The same anxiety. The same resentment toward that person. The same fear about money. The same thought you've been carrying since breakfast. You stood before Allah, but your heart seemed to be somewhere else. And then comes the guilt. You think, what is wrong with me? I pray. I know what I'm saying. I believe in Allah. So why does Salah sometimes feel like something my body completed while my heart barely attended? And this is where I want you to slow down. Because Ibn Arabi gives us a way of looking at this that is much more uncomfortable and much more hopeful. He does not treat the wandering heart as proof that the door has closed. He asks us to look at what the heart is occupied with, what it is capable of receiving, and what happens when it turns away and then turns back. So the problem may not simply be that you don't have enough concentration. You may have misunderstood what Khushu is asking of you. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your mind wanders in Salah, why trying harder can sometimes make your prayer feel less real, why Ibn Arabi describes prayer as something much closer to a living dialogue, and what you can do tonight to begin experiencing Salah differently. And I want you to stay with me, because the deepest part of this isn't about controlling your thoughts. It's about discovering what your thoughts are revealing about your heart. In this video, we are going to move through 5 specific stages. First, we're going to look at why your mind suddenly remembers everything the moment you say, Allahu Akbar. Then we're going to look at what Ibn Arabi means when he describes the heart as something that can become veiled by what occupies it. Then we're going deeper into the uncomfortable possibility that you can become so concerned with having khushu that the self quietly becomes the center of your prayer. After that, we're going to look at Salah differently, not simply as something you say to Allah, but as a form of intimate dialogue in which you are also being addressed. And finally, we're going to bring all of this down to earth with 3 things you can practice tonight. Not next Ramadan, not after you've become a better Muslim. Tonight, let's begin with something very ordinary. You are standing in Salah. You know the surah. You know what comes next. But your mind keeps generating another world. An email, a conversation, a financial problem, something somebody said about you, something you wish you had said. Something you are afraid will happen tomorrow, and because you have been told that khushu means concentration, you start fighting your own mind. You pull it back. It escapes. You pull it back again, and then you notice that you're angry about being distracted. Now you're distracted by your distraction. And eventually you're standing in prayer, thinking about whether you're praying properly. This is a very modern spiritual problem because we have become extraordinarily good at monitoring ourselves. We don't just experience things, we evaluate ourselves experiencing them. We don't just worship, we ask whether we are worshipping correctly. We don't just make dhikr, we ask whether we are feeling enough. And this is why Ibn Arabi is such an interesting guide here. Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi was not simply a poet who occasionally wrote mystical lines about love. His Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan Revelations, is an enormous systematic work dealing with Quran, Hadith, worship, spiritual states, metaphysics, language, and the transformation of the human being. And he devoted an entire major chapter, chapter 69 of the Futuhat, to the secrets of prayer. The work itself identifies chapter 69 as on knowing the secrets of prayer. So when we talk about khushu through Ibn Arabi, we're not taking a modern idea and putting a Sufi quote underneath it. We're entering a much older question, what is actually happening to the human being during Salah. Ibn Arabi's answer begins with the heart, not merely the physical organ. The qalb, the heart, as the inward faculty that turns, receives, perceives, and changes. And one of his most powerful images is the mirror. Ibn Arabi describes the heart as a polished mirror, and explains that what we call rust is connected with becoming preoccupied with other than God, in a way that obstructs divine manifestation from being received. Modern psychology can help us understand one part of the machinery. Research on mind wandering and self-referential thought shows that the brain naturally shifts toward internally generated material, autobiographical concerns, and personally salient thoughts. That doesn't prove Ibn Arabi's metaphysics, but it gives us a useful bridge. The brain explains why attention moves. Ibn Arabi asks what those movements reveal about the heart, and that is where this becomes personal. Think of Bilal, he's 29. He works in it, and today has been one of those days where every problem seems to arrive at once. At 9 his manager criticized a project. At 11:30, a client called with an emergency. At 1:40, Bilal realizes he forgot to answer an important message. Then Dua comes. He walks into the prayer room at work. He puts his phone face down. He stands, Allahu Akbar, and immediately his mind goes back to the meeting. He catches himself. Why am I thinking about work? He forces his attention back. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. 3 seconds later, what exactly did my manager mean by that? He catches himself again. Now he becomes frustrated. I'm supposed to be praying, and this is the irony. Bilal is no longer only distracted by work. He is distracted by his attempt to stop being distracted by work. Have you felt this? You start watching your own mind like a security guard. Every thought becomes an intruder. Every memory becomes evidence. Every lapse becomes a spiritual accusation. But this is where Ibn Arabi's image of the heart changes the way we see the problem. In his discussions of the heart in the Futuhat, Ibn Arabi describes the heart as a polished mirror. He explains that when the heart becomes occupied with the secondary causes of this world, rather than knowledge of God, that attachment functions like rust over the face of the heart, obstructing its reception of divine manifestation. Notice what he is not saying. He is not saying the heart has ceased to exist. He is not saying Allah has disappeared. And he is not saying that one passing thought proves that your prayer has become worthless. He's describing occupation. Imagine a window. The sun is rising outside. The sunlight is still there. But someone has covered the glass with photographs. One photograph is your career. Another is your fear. Another is the argument you keep replaying. Another is what people think about you. Another is tomorrow. The problem isn't that the sun stopped shining. The problem is that the surface through which you receive the light has become crowded. And this is a much more useful way to understand distraction. Modern psychology calls one part of this mind wandering. Researchers have found that attention naturally shifts toward internally generated thoughts, especially material connected to personal concerns and unfinished mental activity. Science describes the machinery. Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it, and what he asks you to do is not become a person who never has another thought. He asks you to understand the heart's relationship with what occupies it, because there is a huge difference between I had a thought and I gave myself completely to the thought. A thought can appear without becoming your destination. Your manager's face can appear in your mind. You don't have to follow him into the meeting again. The financial worry can appear. You don't have to calculate the entire future. The memory can appear. You don't have to reopen the argument. You notice. and you return. Because the moment you notice that you have wandered, you are no longer completely lost in the wandering. You have become aware of it. And now you have a choice. Return to the verse. Return to the posture. Return to the meaning. Return to Allah. This is why you should stop treating every distraction as a catastrophe. The real spiritual danger begins when one distracted moment becomes a story about who you are. I can't concentrate. My Salah is fake. I don't have Khushu. Other Muslims are closer to Allah than I am. Now one moment of mind wandering has become an identity. And that identity can keep you away from the very practice that could transform you. So next time you are in Salah, and your mind suddenly remembers something completely irrelevant, don't turn the prayer into a courtroom. Don't interrogate yourself. Don't spend 10 seconds asking why you are like this. Just return, because there is another layer coming. And this one is more uncomfortable. Because sometimes the distraction isn't the deepest distraction. Sometimes the deepest distraction is you watching yourself pray. Khushu begins when you stop fighting the fact that you wandered. But if you can become distracted by your own thoughts, you can also become distracted by your own spirituality. And that is where Ibn Arabi takes us next. Think of Maryam. She's 34. Over the last 2 years, she has become much more serious about her deen. She listens to lectures while driving. She reads spiritual books before sleeping. She has started waking for tahajjud. And once, during Fajr, she cried in sujood. She remembers that morning vividly. The quiet room, the darkness outside, the feeling in her chest, the tears. And without realizing it, she created an image of herself. That was the real me. Now months have passed. She still prays. She still worships. But the feeling doesn't come. So she tries to recreate it. She slows her recitation. She thinks about death. She tries to remember how emotional she felt that morning. And now something strange happens. She is standing before Allah, but part of her attention is standing outside herself, watching Maryam try to become the woman who once experienced Khushu. This is subtle, because on the surface it looks spiritual, but underneath the self has moved back into the center. The nafs has simply changed its costume. It has not changed its nature. This is where Ibn Arabi's treatment of spiritual states becomes extremely important. He distinguishes between temporary spiritual states, ahwal, and more established spiritual stations, maqamat. A spiritual state can arrive. It can leave. You cannot build your entire identity around its arrival. And Ibn Arabi repeatedly warns against confusing extraordinary spiritual experiences with the actual transformation of the human being. That matters enormously for Salah. Because you may have experienced one prayer that felt alive, and now you secretly believe every prayer should reproduce it. But what if that emotional intensity was never the point? What if you turned a gift into a demand? What if you received sweetness one morning and then spent the next 6 months demanding the same sweetness back? You have stopped receiving the prayer. You are now evaluating it. This is where it gets uncomfortable. You can become so obsessed with having a beautiful prayer that you quietly stop caring about the one you're praying to. Think about how strange that sounds. You are saying, Allah, I want to feel close to you. But internally you are monitoring, am I feeling close to Allah? And the subject of the experience has quietly become me. Am I sincere? Am I spiritual? Am I present? Am I feeling something? Do I have khushu? Do I look like the person who has khushu? The nafs doesn't always demand applause from other people. Sometimes it demands evidence from itself. That is why spiritual self-consciousness can become so exhausting. And modern psychology has a useful word for one piece of this: self-focused attention. When attention turns inward toward monitoring your own performance, you become more aware of yourself as an object being evaluated. You've experienced this outside prayer. Someone compliments you on your appearance. For a moment, you're relaxed. Then you realize they're looking at you. Suddenly you're aware of your face, your hands, your posture, your voice. The experience changes because the observer has entered the experience. Prayer can become like that. You are no longer simply praying, you are observing yourself praying. And this is why forcing yourself to feel Khushu can sometimes make you less present. You're trying to manufacture an internal state while simultaneously checking whether you've manufactured it successfully. Ibn Arabi's answer is much more demanding. He asks you to become receptive rather than performative. Don't ask, "Can I create a spiritual experience?" Ask, "Can I become available to what Allah is teaching me in this moment?" That means a dry prayer can still teach you. A distracted prayer can still expose you. A prayer without tears can still be sincere. And a prayer filled with emotion can still contain ego. Never use the feeling itself as your measuring stick. A person can cry because they are humbled. A person can also cry because they love the feeling of being spiritually moved. Only Allah knows the difference completely. Your responsibility is not to become an expert judge of your own soul. Your responsibility is to keep turning toward Him. This is why Ibn Arabi's language of the heart matters so much. The heart turns, it receives, it becomes occupied, it becomes unveiled, it changes, and your job isn't to freeze it into one permanent emotional state. Your job is to keep returning it to its Lord. So if you pray tonight and feel absolutely nothing, don't manufacture tears. Don't perform sadness. Don't compare tonight's prayer with the best prayer you've ever had. Stand there. Say the words. Let them be true, even if your emotions are quiet. Because there is another level of Salah you have not yet considered. You think you're the one speaking. Ibn Arabi asks you to notice something else. The moment you need to feel spiritual, you have made yourself the subject again. Most people stop at concentration and emotion. Ibn Arabi goes further. He asks you to listen to what is actually happening inside the words of Salah. Think of Omar. He's 41. He has spent the day worrying about his father, who has been unwell. His teenage son has barely spoken to him for a week. There is a financial problem at work that he doesn't know how to solve. On the drive to the masjid, he's already had the same conversation with himself 6 times. What if this happens? What if I can't fix it? What if my son doesn't respect me anymore? Maghrib begins. Omar stands in the row. Allahu Akbar. He starts Al-Fatiha. And then he reaches Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. He has said those words thousands of times. But tonight he hears them differently. The Lord of all worlds, not merely the Lord of the problem in front of me, not merely the Lord of my son's silence, not merely the Lord of my financial fear, the Lord of all worlds. For a few seconds, his private story becomes smaller. Nothing has been solved. His father is still sick, his son is still distant, his financial problem is still waiting. But something has changed. The words have interrupted the story. This is where Ibn Arabi's understanding of prayer becomes extraordinarily rich. In Fusus al-Hikam, in the chapter concerning the Muhammadan wisdom, Ibn Arabi discusses prayer as a unique form of worship and connects it with the greater reality of divine remembrance. He writes that the remembrance of Allah is greater in the prayer, because the divine remembrance and response exceed merely the servant's own act of mentioning his Lord. He then points toward listening to what Allah mentions in the prayer. Stop there. Listening. This changes the entire psychology of Salah. You have probably been taught to think, I need to concentrate on what I'm saying. That's true, but it doesn't go far enough. Ibn Arabi invites you to ask, what am I hearing? Imagine making a phone call to someone you love. You prepared a script, you read it perfectly, but you never listen to the person on the other end. Technically, you spoke, but did you have a conversation? Now think about Al-Fatiha. You say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. You say, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. You say, Maliki Yawmiddin. You say, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. These aren't filler words between movements. They are reshaping the reality you are standing inside. And Ibn Arabi's treatment of prayer repeatedly brings the servant back to this reciprocal dimension. You're not inventing a private conversation with Allah. You're entering a form of worship Allah himself prescribed, using words he revealed. That's why this is not about imagining Allah in a physical form. It isn't. It's about allowing revealed speech to become inwardly real. When you say, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, don't force an emotion, just let mercy become the meaning you're standing inside. When you say, Maliki Yawmiddin, let the fantasy of total control loosen for one moment. You are not the owner of tomorrow. You don't know what tomorrow contains. When you say, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, listen to the confession. You alone we worship. You alone we ask for help. How many things have you secretly treated as sources of salvation? Your salary, your reputation, someone's approval, a relationship, a plan, a particular outcome, and now you are saying, Iyyaka nasta'in. Only you do we ask for help. That isn't just information, it is reorientation. And this gives us a completely different answer to distraction. If your mind wanders during Al-Fatiha, you don't need to create some mystical image. You can simply return to the sentence. Return to the meaning. Return to the relationship. Return to the address. This is also where Quran 29:45 becomes important. Allah tells us that prayer restrains from indecency and wrongdoing, and then says that the remembrance of Allah is greater. Ibn Arabi explicitly comments on this in Fusus al-Hikam, explaining the greater remembrance in terms of the divine response and remembrance within prayer. So perhaps the question after Salah shouldn't always be, did I feel something? Try another question, what did the prayer ask me to see? Maybe you saw your dependence. Maybe you saw your anger. Maybe you saw your obsession with being understood. Maybe you saw how frightened you are of losing control. Maybe you simply saw that your mind is exhausted. All of that can become material for transformation. And this is the part most Islamic content rarely reaches. You don't necessarily need to make the prayer more emotionally intense. You need to make the words more real. Because when the words become real, your private story cannot remain completely untouched. The verse does not change. The listener does. But now we have a problem. If the heart is always moving, what does stillness actually mean? That question takes us to the deepest layer. Think of Aisha. She's 26. Isha has just come in. 10 minutes earlier, she had an argument with her mother. Not a dramatic argument. Something worse. One of those arguments where nobody screams, but both people say exactly enough to hurt each other. Aisha goes to her room. She feels angry. Then guilty for being angry. Then angry because she feels guilty. Her mind keeps replaying the conversation. She looks at the prayer mat. And she thinks, there is no way I can have Khushu right now. That sentence is worth examining. Because what is she assuming? She's assuming she has to become emotionally quiet before she can stand before Allah. But what if she has misunderstood stillness? She makes wudu, she stands, Allahu Akbar. The anger is still there, the memory is still there. Her chest still feels tight. She doesn't pretend otherwise. She notices, I'm angry. Then, I'm hurt. Then, I want my mother to understand me. And then, Allah is still Allah. She continues. This is not perfect concentration, it is something more honest. Ibn Arabi's discussion of the heart gives us a powerful way to understand this. The heart is not a static object. It turns. It changes. It receives different disclosures. It moves between states. In his discussions of the heart and the prophetic imagery of the two fingers, Ibn Arabi reflects on the heart's rapid turning and its movement between different orientations. So a changing heart isn't automatically a failed heart. That's important, because some of you have been treating every emotional movement as a spiritual emergency. You're sad. I've lost Iman. You're distracted. I have no Khushu. You feel angry. Allah must be displeased with me. You feel nothing. I'm spiritually dead. Slow down. Human beings move. The heart moves. The question is not whether movement exists. The question is where you turn when movement happens. Think about the ocean. If you define stillness as an ocean with absolutely no waves, you're going to wait forever. The ocean moves. Wind crosses it. Currents move beneath it. Waves rise and fall. But now imagine a lighthouse. The ocean moves around it. The lighthouse doesn't need to stop the ocean. It simply keeps its orientation. This is the distinction I want you to remember. Your thoughts can move. Your emotions can move. Your memories can move. Your fears can move. Your desires can move. Khushu does not require you to become emotionally dead. It asks for a different relationship with that movement. A thought about tomorrow appears. Instead of, I ruined my prayer. Return, an argument appears. Return, a desire appears. Return, and eventually you discover something beautiful. The act of returning is itself training. This is why I don't want you leaving this video thinking, I need to eliminate thoughts. No, I want you thinking, I need to become better at returning. There is a huge difference. Because if you believe Khushu means zero thoughts, you will lose every time your brain behaves like a human brain. But if Khushu means an increasing capacity to orient the heart toward Allah, then every return matters. And don't misunderstand this as an excuse for carelessness. You still prepare for Salah. You still learn the meanings. You still remove distractions when you can. You still try to pray properly. You still protect the prayer from deliberate negligence. But you stop demanding impossible perfection from the human mind. And this resolves everything we've discussed. First, distraction is not automatically spiritual failure. Second, self-monitoring can become another form of distraction. Third, the words of Salah are not merely sounds you produce, they can become a living address. And fourth, stillness is not the absence of movement. It is orientation within movement. That means your worst prayer can contain one beautiful moment. You wandered. You noticed. You returned. That moment matters. And maybe you've been overlooking it because you were waiting for something much more dramatic. You were waiting for tears, for goosebumps, for a feeling, for an overwhelming spiritual experience. But Allah may be teaching you something quieter. The heart leaves, the heart notices, the heart returns, again, and again, and again. This is not glamorous. It doesn't make a good spiritual Instagram post, but it may be far more important, because you are learning where home is. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it is knowing where to turn. And now we reach the paradox that changes the entire conversation. What if the distraction you hate is actually showing you exactly where your heart needs work? Here is the most uncomfortable idea in this entire video. Your distraction may be giving you information, not permission to be distracted. Information. Think about the thought that keeps appearing in Salah. If it's always money, something is happening inside you around security. If it's always someone's opinion, something is happening around approval. If it's always an argument, something in you still demands recognition. If it's always tomorrow, something in you is struggling to release control. If it's always your phone, your brain may have become conditioned to expect constant novelty. The distraction has exposed an attachment. And this is where Ibn Arabi's image of the heart becomes incredibly powerful. He explains that what is called the rust of the heart relates to becoming occupied with secondary causes rather than knowledge of God. The heart becomes veiled because it is receiving something else. But notice something astonishing in that discussion. The divine presence has not suddenly disappeared. The problem lies in what the heart is receiving and where its attention has become attached. So the question isn't only, why can't I concentrate? Ask, what keeps taking possession of my attention? That is a completely different question. And it can be humbling, because you may discover that the thing you call random distraction isn't random at all. Your mind keeps going to what your heart has been carrying. And now prayer becomes diagnostic. Not because every thought contains a hidden spiritual message. It doesn't. Sometimes you're simply tired. Sometimes your brain is rehearsing unfinished tasks. But recurring patterns deserve attention. The deeper danger is turning the pattern into an identity. I am a distracted person. No, you are a person who discovered distraction. Then you return. That distinction protects you from despair. The mainstream version of Khushu can sound like, control your mind. Ibn Arabi gives us something more profound. Know what occupies your heart. Then turn it. And perhaps this is why you should stop being ashamed of discovering your inner attachments in prayer. You should be serious about them. But you don't have to hate yourself for seeing them. The prayer has shown you something. Now you have something to work with. Your distraction can reveal your attachment. But your attachment does not have to become your destination. The thought that exposes your attachment can become the doorway to releasing it. So let's make this practical. If you stand up for your next Salah tonight, what exactly should you do when the mind wanders? The first practice is simple. Name and return. Before your next Salah, take 30 seconds. Don't check your phone, don't add another lecture, just stand or sit quietly and ask, what is occupying my mind right now? Give it one word: money, work, family approval, fear, tomorrow, anger. Then pray. When that thought returns, don't argue with it. Don't say, why am I thinking about this? Don't say, I have terrible khushu. Just recognize money and return to the words. This uses a psychological skill called metacognitive awareness, noticing the activity of your mind without automatically becoming absorbed in it. The spiritual translation is beautifully simple. Notice. Return. The second practice is one verse, one reality. Choose one line of Al-Fatiha. Just one. For example, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Before Salah, remind yourself what it means. Then when you reach it, don't force emotion. Ask, if these words are completely true right now, how should I stand? Let the meaning become physical. You aren't trying to have an experience. You're allowing the words to interrogate your current life. Who are you really depending on? Whose approval are you really seeking? What outcome are you treating as if you cannot survive without it? The third practice is the 10-second return. Every time you discover that you've wandered, make one clean return. Notice, soften, return, no internal courtroom, no spiritual self-attack, no dramatic conclusion, just return. And after Salah, don't grade yourself from 1 to 10. Ask one question: where did my heart keep running? Write down the answer, not to shame yourself, to know yourself. If it kept running toward money, look at your relationship with security. If it kept running towards someone's approval, look at your relationship with praise. If it kept running toward an old argument, look at your need to be understood. This is where prayer becomes more than a ritual you complete. It becomes a mirror. And tonight, don't try to have the most beautiful Salah of your life. Try to have one honest return. Then another. Then another. Because the goal is not to become a person whose mind never moves. The goal is to become a person who knows where to turn when it does. Don't measure your prayer by how rarely you wander. Measure it by how honestly you return. And now go back to the person we met at the beginning, the person who finished Salah and wondered why nothing inside had changed. Remember the person from the beginning. The person who finished Salah, made tasbih, said salam, and felt the same anxiety waiting for them on the other side. The same insecurity. The same fear. The same resentment. At the beginning, you might have told that person, you need more Khushu. But now you know that sentence isn't enough. You have to ask, what occupied your heart? What were you carrying into the prayer? What did your mind repeatedly run toward? What happened when you noticed? Did you condemn yourself? Did you perform spirituality? Or did you simply return? Because now you understand something different about Khushu. Khushu isn't a magical state where your brain becomes silent and your emotions become permanently soft. It is not spiritual anesthesia. It is not a performance. And it is not proof that you have reached some permanent level of closeness. It is a heart becoming more capable of turning toward Allah. A heart that notices. A heart that receives. A heart that returns. Ibn Arabi's treatment of prayer gives us a vision of Salah as something alive, a place where remembrance, response, attention and the heart meet. His discussion of prayer in Fusus al-Hikam even directs attention toward what Allah mentions within the prayer, not merely what the servant says. So tonight, when your mind wanders, don't panic. Listen, what is your heart carrying? Then return. Because perhaps the greatest sign of Khushu is not that nothing pulls you away. Perhaps it is that you have learned where home is. Khushu is not when nothing pulls you away, it is when, despite everything, your heart learns to turn back to Allah. And I want you to sit with one question. Think of the last time you stood in Salah and your mind repeatedly escaped. Not the thought you are proud to admit. The thought you would rather Allah not know was occupying you. What was it? And what did that thought reveal about what your heart has been carrying? Write that honestly in the comments, not for me, but because sometimes the first act of Khushu is finally becoming honest about where your heart has been.